Hello and welcome to episode 76 of Off the Bandstand. My name is Christian Wiggs. I am your host. Today's episode is Chris Madsen, a saxophonist, composer, and pedagogue based in Chicago, Illinois. Featured on Jazz Is and All About Jazz, Chris maintains an active schedule as an in-demand band leader and sideman and serves on the jazz faculty at the University of Illinois at Chicago. This episode was part of Bandstand Presents' ongoing series, The Residency, that facilitates community between the Austin, Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York scenes through collaborative shows with the Christian Wiggs Big Band, the staple Monday Night Jam at the Elephant Room, educational engagements at Texas State University, and episodes of Off the Bandstand. In this episode, we chat about cross-cultural parallels between comedy and jazz. We also chat about the confluence of musical individuality with reverence for lineage, and an origin story that we hope sees the inception of the Jack Frost Big Band. Moving on to our featured release this week, this is Bonfire, Chris's fifth record as a leader, featuring a quartet consisting of Stu Mindeman, Clark Summers, and Dana Hall. The album features all original compositions and traces his growth as a musician, revisiting ideas for songs that had laid dormant for many years. If you want to support this release directly, you can head over to chrismadsen.bandcamp.com, and for all things Chris, all the time, you can follow him on Instagram at Chris Madsen Music. On the calendar for Bandstand Presents, The Residency returns on Wednesday, September 28th with the Christian Wiggs Big Band featuring Benny Benack III and Matisse Picard. For more information on this show and tickets, you can head over to bandstandpresents.com. And for all things Bandstand all the time, you can follow us on Instagram at Bandstand Presents. That is it for all of the mentions and announcements this week. Let's dive into episode 76. Chris Madsen. This is Off the Bandstand.
I call my son Buddy.
Okay, that's like a perfect example of the use of buddy. But sometimes people will be like, hey buddy, how are you? You know? And I'm like, it almost has an air of like, because I think I associate it with being like a child and then a father.
Oh,
you know?
right. Sort of diminutive.
It's sort of.
Clark has a streak where he'll use Buddy. Has he used Buddy on you?
He has, and now that we're on camera, I can say I hate it. No. No.
Be documented forever.
Well, I mean, like Clark's a different kind of story because I've kind of seen him as an informal mentor, you know, for the past several years. I mean, that's actually like how we're here, right? Is because, you know, he was on tour with Kurt, and then David Young. Do you know David Young?
Sure.
Yeah. Sure. So David, you know, hooked it up to where, you know, Clark had very graciously kind of comped some tickets to the show and was like, yeah, we'll be around afterwards to chat. And then it was a very young person move. It was, you know, 5-6 years ago. So I had just released a record and I kind of DM'd him. I was like, thank you for the tickets. Like, just release a record. Like, if you have any pointers, you know, whatever. Yeah. And even though it's kind of one of those things where it's like, you know, like, should you do that? Yeah, you know? Yeah. I did put the disclaimer of like, you can totally like not reply to this message and it'll be fine. But then he like sent back this like 6-page email that was like, very little was about the actual album, but there was so much that was actually about just how I should be thinking about the music in general. Yeah. And then it was just this paradigm shift. Like, I'm sitting in a Shipley's Donut parking lot, you know, just got my donut holes and a chocolate milk, a child, you know.
Right, 21. Of course, as a child would do.
Right. I was the buddy in this scenario. right. And just was kind of like, oh God, like I either need to get like really serious about this. And it wasn't like a bad email. It was just like, it was convicting.
Right,
you know?
right.
So anyways, all of that to say, going back to the buddy thing, is that he does use that, but in a way, it's like, oh, I'm totally fine with you using the word buddy.
Right.
Because I have such a kind of admiration and reverence for everything that he does and what he kind of provided me, you know, in the whole process. So,
of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a jazz philosopher, you know. Yeah. Absolutely. And we've had a lot of discussions about, you know, the finer points of you know, the scene and how to approach it and what, you know, career trajectory and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I've had similar experiences with him, yeah.
Yeah.
He's a special guy.
He is, man.
But don't tell him I said that.
But I won't.
Don't
we're
show
not
this
using
to him.
any of this.
I hope
Are
not.
you joking?
Thank God,
Come on, man. We
Thank
can't
God.
blow up those egos because we all know that bass players have the biggest egos.
Absolutely.
You know, it's
without
just,
a doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Singers, on the other hand, just like
They're always humble and
just so humble. My man. Well,
the saxophone players too. Honestly, yeah.
Of course. It's right there at the bottom of the pride level.
Absolutely.
Man, speaking of laughs, speaking of comedy, I really am so happy that like I learned that you are into like stand-up and podcasts, because I've always, you know, in some weird way, I know it's not a 1-to-1 exact ratio, but I feel like we as jazz musicians, or just people in the creative arts, kind of share a lot of the same kind of experiences as like comedians, because it's just doing stage work, it's performing, but it's also trying to be the most authentic version of yourself.
Sure.
You know, have you ever kind of put those two and two together in a similar kind of way, or is it kind of separate things?
Well, that's actually a great question for Jeff when you meet with Jeff. Not to deflect or anything,
Sure.
but because Jeff has released an album a few years ago, 3 or so years ago, called Yes and Music for 9 Improvisers.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think his idea was the same as I think there are a lot of parallels there. You know, like the idea that when you're starting out in stand up, you should expect to bomb.
Yeah.
You just have to go through that period. You know, there's very few people that sort of get it right away.
Yeah.
And you just like there's no substitute for just going on stage and getting through it and learning. And I think there's a lot of that with jazz too. I mean, from the perspective of a jazz educator, you know, we can practice. I can teach my students scales and tunes and how to improvise and sound and all that stuff, but there are certain things about stage presence and leading a group that you just, it's very difficult to build that into a curriculum, an educational curriculum. And so that's why I think it's so great to being in Chicago and having our students have the ability to come and see us do that, and also have the opportunity to lead their own groups, you know, and get that experience on stage, just doing that stuff that is kind of impossible to teach in a classroom setting. And in that sense, I think it is. You just like, you know, the endings of your tunes are going to be terrible for a while, for a good year or so, you know, of playing live gigs until you sort of learn how to end tunes and how to tag, where the tag happens. It's, you know, there's no real formula for it. It's just, you kind of have to feel it out harmonically where to do the tag. But anyway, yeah, getting back to your point, I think personally, I mean, I'm a huge comedy fan.
Yeah.
I mean, and yeah, I think there's a lot to be learned from that. I think there's a lot of cross cultural stuff that we can learn from each other, I think.
Yeah. Right. What are the podcasts that you're listening to? Like, what's in the regular rotation?
Well, I was just listening to a few this morning, actually. Okay. It's kind of like my wake up. Yeah.
But we're early right now, man. You must be an early bird.
No, I was at the tail end of one, and then the other one started.
Got it.
So I was listening to one called The Sloppy Boys, which is it's like there was this group of comedians called the Birthday Boys out of like Ithaca.
Okay.
And they actually had a sketch show on IFC for a few years.
Cool.
And now 3 of those guys branched off, and they're sort of like a comedy party rock band, but they're actually legitimate musicians. They can really play. And so now they have a podcast where like all of their songs are they're all about, you know, having a good time and sort of tongue-in-cheek talking about, like, you know, we're here for the beer and all that stuff. And so their podcast is about just tasting different cocktails, just sort of recreating Prohibition-era cocktails and more modern ones, and they give you the recipe, and then you can, you know, like last night I tried a penicillin cocktail for the first time.
Whoa.
Because it was on the menu, and it was because of the Sloppy Boys. Yeah. So shout out to the Sloppy Boys.
Shout out to the Sloppy. I hope it's BOIZ instead of BOYS. Is it BOYS?
It is BOYS, and I think they really missed the mark on that one.
You can rebrand, you know.
So it's not too late.
In the Bible, Saul can rebrand to Paul. Yeah. You know,
if he can do it, they can do it. Yeah.
True.
Yes,
all
absolutely.
things possible.
I agree. Yeah.
Man, okay, cool. So on the side of like stand-up too, have there been any kind of exceptional specials that either have come out recently that you've watched or just ones that are kind of mainstays for you to go back to?
Not I don't really watch them as they come out. I'm sort of more of a YouTube aggregator where I'll just kind of work in certain comedians into my algorithm for YouTube, and then just watch the clips of those people. But yeah, there's no one that really stands out to me specifically. Just kind of I guess lately I've been getting into Tom Segura.
Cool.
Who's he's been around. He's sort of another podcast guy. I don't listen to his podcast, but I think he's a decent stand-up. There was actually on the plane over, I had downloaded this comedy special about Tom and then two other American comedians going over into East Asia, into the East Asian markets, and sort of tapping into those.
Interesting.
Like they're in Singapore and they go to Japan, a bunch of places where I think there's a comedy sort of a renaissance happening, kind of like what happened in the 80s in the US. You know, I think it's starting to really blossom there.
Yeah.
And I think there was this comedy promoter who was bringing over American comics to sort of show audiences the level that you can sort of aspire to, just because we've been sort of cultivating that here for longer.
Right.
And sort of treating it as an art form. So it was very, very interesting to see that. It's a really good doc. It's called I Need You to Kill. That's the name of the documentary.
I wonder how their bits worked in another market. Like, not only like, because, you know, like Bo Burnham has a joke where he's like, yeah, in Kentucky, I had all my light shows, and they were like, guys got moving candles, you know, like, you know, no disrespect to the people from Kentucky that are watching the show. I don't know if there are any, but just, you know, in perpetuity.
Sure.
I apologize right up front.
Sure, of course.
Out of line.
Right.
I'm out.
Right.
Anyway, but I wonder how, you know, especially cross-culturally in a different country, those bits kind of worked.
Yeah. Well, Tom had a really hard time at first, you know, because I think a lot of those audiences are used to a different sense of humor coming from local comics, or at least expats that have sort of moved there and lived there permanently. And I remember him saying he had to go back to older material to make it work, like stuff that he couldn't really try newer things with those audiences. He had to sort of go back to the stuff that he knew really worked. Yeah. And I mean, I guess that's kind of similar to jazz in a way, because you go to revisit older material that you know works, you know? Like and instead of sort of trying more experimental things based on the context of I guess there's kind of another parallel there between the two.
Totally.
Yeah.
I think there is a parallel. I think simultaneously there's a parallel, but there's also a unique difference where we're almost encouraged as musicians to play the hits, right? Because people want to hear what they know.
Right.
But like, I feel like, you know, there's a comedian who I really liked in high school. I'm not sure if I don't know why I'm throwing him under the bus now. I'm not sure if I align quite as much, because it's just a lot of one-liners, a lot of like shock value humor, a lot of stuff that maybe, you know, if the line's here, sometimes it's right there. But a guy named Anthony Jeselnik.
I'm a fan, honestly. I'm a fan of Anthony.
I haven't checked out his stuff in a bit. I remember I loved Caligula. Like, you know, in the days before streaming platforms were like everything, I like would buy all the DVDs, you know, and I'd have like the collection or whatever. Right. My father and mother, whenever I hit like 1,500 DVDs at the house, they were like, this has got to stop, man. I know.
You were serious about it.
I was serious about it. Well, because like I was either going to go into RTF or I was going to go into, like radio, television, film, and then, or, feel bad about explaining it. I just didn't know if I was like, the acronym. I'm not sure if it'll translate.
I didn't know what it was. But thank you.
Sure, of course. Or music, because you know those were just like the two big things. And I was like, I feel like I'm a little farther in, but maybe I'll use that as inspiration, or I'll use Kevin as inspiration to be like, we can pop around. And I guess this is sort of television, kind of. Yeah. I don't know, in the ethos somewhere. Sure. Getting back to the whole thing though, is like, Anthony Jeselnik. I went and saw a show right after he released his second special. And he did like, half the show, and it was all new material. And then he tells one repeat joke, and you start to hear like a few groans, and he goes, "Oh, I'm sorry. Did you think that I was going to do all new material? Buckle up, because the rest of it's what you've already seen. I just released a special last month. Here we go." And like leaned into it.
Wow, very interesting.
So it seems like there's kind of a, like going to the tried and true, but also like musicians get to play the hits and it's almost encouraged. Sure, yeah. As opposed to sometimes the reception might not be quite as good if you're like doing repeat material. But I don't know, if a good joke is a good joke, then it's, it's there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a good tune is a good tune, you know? and the solos with I guess with the delivery, I don't know. I wonder how much improvisation and interpretation is there with comics. I'd have to sit down and talk with somebody about that because like with a jazz tune, the solos are always going to be different.
Sure.
And you will have matured theoretically since the last time you played it, hopefully, and I guess a comic would have matured too. But I wonder if that delivery has to be the same every time in order to elicit that reaction.
Interesting. Yeah. Trying out different tones, stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that also, talking about how they're varying their approach based on what market they're in. I mean, that also has a huge parallel of us, we might play the same club 2 nights. First night, we play arrangements, they kill.
Yeah.
The second night, you try to do the exact same thing, people just aren't going to dig it. And that's even in one isolated setting.
Yeah.
Whenever you're on the road and you're playing, whether it's different places around Chicago or just different places around the world in general, how do you approach are you focused more on what you think that market wants to hear based on your perception of that scene? Or are you no, I'm just going to bring me and see what they think?
Yeah, I mean, I think in Chicago there is so much of an influx of tourism that even playing we'll play in a jazz club there that we'll sort of play the same show 2 nights in a row with the understanding that people are probably not going to be coming back the second night because they're not going to be in town anymore, because that kind of thing. And I guess it depends on which club you're going to. Certain clubs are more sort of tourism heavy than others. But I think I think there are certain clubs, and just speaking from my experience in Chicago, there are certain clubs that it's not. If it's a tourist audience that aren't necessarily musicians, you do have to be careful about sort of matching the aesthetic of what the club is sort of trying to provide. I mean, I'm not going to name specific clubs or anything, but
name names.
No, that's okay. I don't want to get in any hot water, but I mean, I think, but then there are other clubs where you're expected to stretch out and just do whatever, try new material, that kind of thing. So I think maybe it's more club specific, and different clubs or venues is maybe a better word to use. Will have a different spirit of the audience, like certain. If I were to go into a certain club where it's sort of much more, it has a more experimental, young vibe, where I know that the audience is probably a lot of music students and they're sort of expecting to hear progressive music. If I were to go in there and play Days of Wine and Roses, it's probably going to be like, what's going on here? But the opposite experience would be at a club sort of more that more caters to vocal jazz and tourism. I think that's it. As far as repeating repertoire, I'm always trying to seek out new material, whether it's my own or whether it's tunes that I've always wanted to play. Like I've got a quartet show coming up in June, and it's at a club that's sort of more caters usually to vocalists.
Okay.
And so I know that I can't really play my original material there because it's just a little too out there. But there are plenty of tunes that aren't necessarily in the American songbook lineage that I can still, dip into, like Horace Silver's songbook or something would work well there.
Yeah.
But you also have to sort of explain. You have to sort of bring the audience along with you a little bit and sort of hold their hand. Like, here's what to listen to. Here's what to listen for in this next song. I chose this song because of this and that. Yeah.
Well, context is everything, right?
Of course.
For your audience, and it's that's why I think stage banter and crowd work is so important, and it's less about the next tune was written by Jimmy Van Heusen and it was recorded first in 1952. It's less about that, but being like, hey, I've sometimes at the risk of talking too much, which. I would never talk too much.
No.
I don't have a talk show.
No, of course not.
I would never do that.
I wouldn't expect that. No.
Thank you. That means a lot to me right now. I sometimes will take that extra time if it's like an original composition that really was meaningful to me, and the way that I wrote the lyrics or wrote the melody or both, and then how I worked with the collaborator, because jazz can be something that is very dense and not always the easiest listening for general audiences. But how can we give them the context? How can we give them kind of the crash course, Adam Neely style, of what to listen for and what kind of colors? I think that like the reason why scores are so impactful in films is because the score is designed to augment what is happening on screen. So if you are given what's on screen, but just kind of in your head, imagination, then you'll be thinking about that the entire time. You'll be listening for the kind of melodic and harmonic elements that evoke that feeling. So you're absolutely right. That context in that is everything. And something you touched on was lineage. And, I kind of subscribe to this idea of kind of continuing down the family tree, like a lot of people are, I want to sound like this person, I want to sound like this person. And I'm sure like kind of innately this is embedded, but I try to consciously focus on, okay, there's all these great musicians out there. I can try to pull for me who I like from each, or like the nuances from each person. But ultimately, it's not a secret. I won't talk about it all the time, even though I mention it a lot, but like I try to follow in the lineage of like Kurt and John Hendricks and Mark Murphy and that kind of vibe. So what is your kind of take on how to balance individuality as a player, but also this idea, if you subscribe to it, of following in a lineage, and like who are those people for you if so?
Yeah, that's a great question, man. That's something I could talk about all day. It's a subject of endless fascination for me, honestly. And well, I guess I'll put it this way. I definitely believe that for most people, following on your instrument, sort of adhering and understanding the lineage of great players from really the inception of the instrument, right? Like going back for me to someone like Coleman Hawkins in the 20s, who more or less invented the sound of saxophone, and then sort of understanding how that leads to this person and this person and this person, and sort of studying and taking apart their styles. It should be a crucial process of any musician's journey, for lack of a better term. But you don't want to. I think you're looking. You hit the nail on the head when you said you're looking for an individual voice. That's the whole point, right? You will want to be as identifiable on your instrument as your heroes are in their instruments. Yeah. And so for me, what I tell my students, and something that I believe, is that I think the more influences you're able to amass from a diverse pool, the more you're able to sort of, your own voice will sort of blossom on its own. Yeah. And so I've sort of come back around in a way to where I was when I was a kid. And what I mean by that is, I used to go in high school when I first started listening to jazz really intently. I would sort of be really stuck on one player for half a year, and then I'd totally move on to someone else, and then totally move on to someone else.
Was it always saxophone players or different instruments?
Yeah, it was always always saxophone. Yeah, and so then when I got older, I sort of adopted this idea of synthesis. Like taking as many influences as you can and being able to sort of copy their styles. I have a whole. I used to have this series on Instagram and social media and YouTube called Alternate Jazz History, where I sort of copy the styles of certain players and put them in weird situations. And so that's just kind of, that definitely goes along with the idea of taking these influences and building your own voice from there. I think there are a few players who are able to find their own voice without going through that process, and good for them. God bless them. That's just not. I don't know that I could do that. Sure. But for me, as much of an original voice as I'm able to have on the saxophone has definitely come from that study of lots and lots of different players within the jazz idiom on my instrument. And I think it's interesting though, because when you look back at who my heroes were, like take, whatever, John Coltrane, he was sort of working with like 2 or 3 influences really, maybe a couple more than that. But he was basically, he took those influences and came up with this radically new thing. But I don't know that paradigm really works anymore, because we've amassed so much history in the music, that there's so much that's happened since that.
Yeah.
So to understand all of that stuff that happens after Coltrane, for example, is to really understand how you can fit into that lineage.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm a big believer in the lineage and sort of understanding that. But what I was saying about sort of going back, now I've sort of settled on like maybe 3 or 4 saxophone players who I really, really hold near and dear. And I will check out, I'm always trying to check out lots of different players within the music, but yeah, I definitely have settled on my favorites as my 30s have come to an end. And now I basically sort of listen to what I want to listen to only, a lot more than I did when I was in my 20s and 30s. And some of my favorite players, I've mentioned Coltrane, of course, and Wayne Shorter is a huge one. Joe Henderson. I really like Michael Brecker. I really like Bob Berg. He's sort of a lesser-known tenor player, but very inspirational. And it's funny because these players are all players that I was listening to when I was a teenager. And it's like, well, I gravitated initially to those players when I was a kid, and I still feel passionate listening to them, even now, And so there's just something, I think there's something about what you're initially drawn to that can be very inspirational and continue through the rest of your life. Because like I said, I'm revisiting those players again now.
Totally.
So yeah, that's, have you found a similar thing? I mean, I know this is your show, but I mean, I'm curious to know your approach to that question.
Well, honestly, I love that you're like, yeah, what's your opinion? Because it is not like I try to set up things and then kind of get out of the way so we can focus on the guest. But I do love that dialogue, so I appreciate you asking the question. Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, and I have talked about it before, so I'll try to keep it truncated. There's a part of George's episode of like From the Drummer's Perspective with Ulysses, where Ulysses asked him what it was like meeting Art Blakey for the first time, and he was like, "Oh man, I'm gonna try to keep it brief because I've been told that I'm verbose. People have criticized. So like in the same vein as George, I'll try to rein it in. But I think that I was kind of late into. I think my upbringing was musical theater. My mom was a choreographer. My brother was like everything: dancer, choreographer, or dancer, singer, instrumentalist, actor, professional personality, and continues to be so. And so I was kind of exposed to all the, Golden Age musicals in this really thriving community theater. So because of that, I was already acclimated to the jazz idiom a bit. 2 groups came through town, Take 6 and New York Voices, and I was like, I don't know what that is. But I know it's speaking to my soul, just like a lot of dense harmony. And then kind of got into it a little later. There's a singer and pianist out of New York named Tony DeSayer. And he does a lot of the symphony circuit. And he came through and then got to do an opportunity with him whenever I was like 17. And I was like, okay, I think I'd like to go into jazz. And at that time it was, like most people, it was Bublé and Sinatra. It was kind of those obvious choices, but I was also first a trumpet player. So I was listening to like Wayne Bergeron and like Clifford Brown and Freddie Hubbard and trying to get into that, trying to see how I could reconcile these things. And then the Sinatra thing started to fall off about like a year and a half later, because I was like, okay, I don't mean this as any disrespect, but a lot of it's kind of predictable to me. I can kind of tell where either the phrasing's going to go or the melody's not going to be as, and that was actually something that took me a little bit to want to come around to, because when I would listen to like recordings of anybody else, like Ella Fitzgerald, or whenever I heard Kurt for the first time, I was like, I know in the wee small hours of the morning, this isn't in the wee small hours of the or whatever. I'd be like, there's slightly different things. And then kind of put that on hold for a second and then went into the Chet Baker thing, because as a trumpet player, singer, it kind of, there was a lot of, commonality there.
You kind of look like him too, actually. You kind of look like Chet, yeah.
Oh, in the end? In the end?
No. Prime, Chet.
Took
Prime.
that. Thank you. That's
Sorry.
very nice. He was a looker, so
Yeah,
I take that.
so too,
I take that very near and dear to my heart.
Sure, yeah.
Chris, can we have you here every week? Just like, if nothing else, like a Questlove, like in the back, be like, Christian, you're looking great today. I'm like, it's that powder that Gabriella was doing.
That's right.
It's great.
That's a secret. Yeah.
But yeah, and then I remember like the first time that I really like heard Kurt. I was like at a gig in San Antonio. It was a wedding gig. I remember it because we were wearing these. The bride and groom wanted us to wear white coats, and David Young was my mentor. He was the one who like whenever I got to town, he gave me my first shot, gifted me a big band, taught me all of the business, kind of side of everything. David is like supremely the most beautiful cat with the most knowledge, and I owe him everything. Like we wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for him in a multitude of ways because he connected me with Clark.
Sure, yeah.
But so anyways, I remember we were wearing these. David decided, I don't want to get everybody's sizes, so I'll just order 46R for everyone. So we're wearing these like lab coats, playing this, mix of a jazz and a top 40s band thing. It was outrageous. So I'm, in my father's jacket, basically, in backstage, and I listened to Leaving Again / In the Wee Small Hours of the Morning, which is on Kurt's Night Moves, and I was like, oh, whoa. Like this is the next level of like storytelling and like evoking a thing. Yeah. And then I just like went really hard into that because I was like, I just feel like my line about him is that, he kind of sets a new standard of not only what a jazz vocalist can be, but what a jazz vocalist should be. And it's not like there's one way to do it, but I just think that there's a level of like in it. Like sometimes vocals can feel like it's like the band and then the vocals kind of glide over in this very beautiful way. Kurt's not going for a very conventional sound. It's like he's treating it like an instrumentalist, and that's what makes it so compelling to me. So yeah, to wrap that up, I think I did get a little verbose, but I think I just started leaning into that side of things, and then as a fear of going too much into that and being a copycat for lack of a more nice term for myself is. I was like, okay, well, I don't really want to listen to singers that much anymore. I want to start listening to instrumentalists. So I really started getting into like Bill Evans and kind of going back to those trumpet roots and trying to listen to more Lee Morgan. And, that was, for some reason, trumpet players and pianists, I think, saxophone solos kind of scare me sometimes.
Me too.
Yeah, right. Because it's just like, oh my gosh, like, there's such a breadth, and trumpet players also can do the same thing, but sometimes because of whatever constraints, whether it's chops or whatever, like 3 valves, it lends itself well. I'm not gonna say it forces, but it lends itself well to playing maybe some more condensed stuff, or not spacing it out.
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of just where I landed on the lineage thing. And I mean, as of this recording, I'm 26. I have a lot left in that lineage, that family tree thing, figuring it out. But it has been a fun progression to just kind of see what ponds to kind of step in every once in a while.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's really cool. That's I didn't realize that you had the trumpet the background with that. Do you bust it out?
I do still. I told this story a couple weeks ago that I taught a bunch of trumpet private lessons, and that was mostly what was getting my chops up. And if I was playing like a duo or trio gig, at a steakhouse, I'd pull out like a flugelhorn, and play just a few tunes. But it's its own animal, and it really takes a dedicated kind of thing. And so once the show started being on set and we got kind of vaccines became available, we started getting back out again. I didn't have quite as much time, so I kind of just let my students age out, that were then going to college. Yeah. And then I started basically just focusing on this, and I'd realize, I need to dust or get the dust off the horn. And then I did like this, or what is it? What's the one is it Veterans Day that's in November?
Is it Veterans Day?
It's one of those.
Memorial Day is in May, I think, right?
Yeah, so and then Labor's in September. Yeah. It was some holiday that required, playing taps and playing patriotic tunes. I called 25 trumpet players. Nobody could do it. And I was like, to the book where I was like, measured expectations. I haven't played my horn in a bit. Play the first tune. I'm like, my chops are feeling good. And then I was like, oh no, on the second one, because I went a little too hard on the things. A lot of, for the next couple tunes. But, yeah. So I try to keep playing.
That's cool.
But
yeah, I'm glad that Chet could serve as an inspiration, because he's not a singer or a trumpet player personally, but he's been an inspiration to me as far as just lyricism and melodic interpretation. And I've learned a lot of tunes from him because he sings the melody so pretty straight most of the time. Him and Sinatra, I think, are two male vocalists that I really like to check in with as far as learning tunes. Because the melodic sense is so pure.
Yeah,
and it's as much as I love someone like Billie Holiday, you can't learn a tune from Billie Holiday.
Sure.
You're not going to learn it the right way, or the authentic way.
Right.
The original way. So, that's very cool, man.
Yeah, the original way, the real book, the original way. All the changes are exactly right, and all the melodies are exactly correct.
That's the key. They're all in the right key.
They are.
They're also legible.
They are.
Yeah.
Amazing. We're going to get some hate mail from Hal Leonard. Just one disgruntled guy that's like, I stumbled across your show.
Yeah, right.
2 thumbs down.
Yeah,
with the emoji. He's going to print out the emoji on the card.
That just makes it even worse.
It is.
It's like turning the knife.
I know, it is. It's turning the thumb into a knife. Right in there.
Yeah, exactly.
Feel like that pop sound I made with my mouth is going to be really loud on the microphone.
Probably.
Who knows?
Probably, yeah. I think we got some ear damage
Kevin's looking over here and he's just like, this is my last day on set. I'm not doing this anymore. This guy, we're a familial bunch. Man, I know that you had said before that Bob Brookmeyer was a big influence on your writing as an arranger.
Sure,
if I remember that correctly. But I was really excited to talk to you about just arranging in general, because whenever we talked on our phone call about like what we were going to do, what you were going to arrange for the band, I was like, just free reign, whatever you want to do. It could be original, could be a standard, could be something super out, could be a pop tune. And you brought back Summer Soft. And so I was curious, why Summer Soft?
Well, I don't know. I think you had dropped Stevie Wonder, Michael Jackson, just as examples, like within that pop category. You said like, whether it's Stevie or whether it's Michael or whatever. And I'm thinking, I've never really arranged a Stevie tune for big band like this. I wonder, and so I just spent the next couple of days listening to a lot of his catalog and trying to think what could be adaptable for big band, what could work. Am I hearing, those big band sounds somehow associated with this tune?
Yeah.
And I just happened upon there and on Summersoft, and I just I thought, okay, this could definitely do it. So it was really as simple as that. It was just kind of me. I didn't want to do a standard just because there are thousands of arrangements of all the standards that I know you've probably sung them all, and I wanted to tap into that pop sort of new standard. I guess maybe a better term for it is new standard.
Sure.
Kind of market. The tune just really spoke to me, and I love how it sort of has this natural crescendo from the piano intro, not my arrangement, but Stevie's arrangement.
Sure.
The piano intro, and then all those key changes at the end where it just keeps going and going, and it's just like, man, that's just so effective, And I felt like, okay, this has a natural cadence to it in terms of the building, so I can sort of play with that. Like my chart doesn't really follow that trajectory of going up, but it kind of ebbs and flows and then kind of ends on a higher energy like that.
Yeah, I like that after I finish out, which thank you for saving me from having to go up one more.
Sure,
I think I texted you. I was like, I'm down to do it in the original key.
Yeah.
Because I with standards, anything, I always like to do things in the original key.
Yeah,
I think it can be sometimes an arduous, gig if everything's in weird keys. But
yes,
it was cool how you had me then lay out, but you continued to go on, and then you just kind of do this thing where you're shifting between all the different tonal centers until we get back to a nice, reasonable key for a singer.
Thanks for noticing that. Yeah, I sort of took you up to the top of the key that you had specified you wanted to go up to, and then sort of cycle back and let the tenor and the guitar blow over the higher keys, and then come back down, and you end. Yeah. So I hope that was effective. Like I said, it didn't seem like you were straining too much. So hopefully it definitely. I mean, it sounded great on it yesterday.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I hope it's in a comfortable range for you, because it sounds good.
Yeah. Thank you, man. Yeah, no, what I kind of use as those, metrics, because I kind of gave you like the range of like comfortable, where I'm like, okay, here's where I think that it's like a constant, that just like on any given day, A flat is going to be there. It's like sometimes, Mike Saylor's trumpet player, I'm not sure if you met him.
Last night, yeah, he was there. Yeah, great player.
Yeah, he's a great player, man. But sometimes he'll write stuff for me where it's like a high B flat, and I'm like, really gonna have to pinch that one out. Like I'm gonna need to make sure that I'm like, getting in the right mindset. Doing some meditations before,
Or maybe inhale some helium, That
honestly, just like behind my back the whole time. They're like, what's he holding behind his back?
It's just a party balloon,
Yeah, right, exactly. Actually, that's a great idea. That's a bit. Hank Sinatra with the helium balloon.
Absolutely. He's the kind of guy that would use a helium balloon, I think.
Hank Sinatra, yeah. He would. Man, cat's got to get hip to Hank Sinatra. Give it a Google in like 12 months.
It's going to be everywhere.
Yeah, right. But yeah, so, you also started writing when you were young, right? Like 17?
Yeah, right around there, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you mean big band stuff or just in general?
Oh, I guess both.
Oh, yeah, so my first big band arrangement was, maybe like 19.
Okay.
And then, I had just been messing around with writing original tunes since, I don't know, like freshman in high school. And they were all absolutely terrible. But again, it was like the idea of you're going to go through some bombing in order to get to the good stuff, So, anyway, yeah.
Right, okay, amazing. So, and I am getting the name correct, Bob Brookmeyer, right?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. But yeah, Bob, you said, had like an influence. I'm curious about how your approach to writing, stylistically or otherwise, has shifted. I'll pause in the middle of that question to say, like, Thomas, for example. Some people will go, like, they'll hear like part of a chart. Like people last night on Dear Prudence, they went, "There's Thomas. He's here with us." It's a Thomasism, you know. And he's like, I don't take that the wrong way at all. That just means I'm developing a brand, baby, you know?
Yeah.
So back to the question that I'll repeat the first half is, in all these years of writing for big band or otherwise, how has your style shifted?
Well, I can say that it has been influenced by my recent graduate work, where when you're doing a DMA at the University of Illinois, they make you choose a cognate, which basically means a minor. And my cognate was classical composition and theory, So I was taking private lessons with a composition teacher, which I had never done before. I had taken private lessons with jazz arranging teachers before, but never with a classical composition composer and professor before, and it really opened my brain up to a lot of different things. We studied the Messiaen's Quartet for the End of Time. I sort of picked that apart a little bit, and I came up with some different, more experimental stuff. Writing for, especially, I'm talking about writing for small group now, sort of writing more for quartet. But it definitely opened me up to, I think that's something that a lot of jazz composers would benefit from, is sort of, almost expanding your palette to a classical aesthetic, or understanding how classical composers think can really bring your writing, whether it's for big band or whether it's for small group or writing lead sheets or whatever, it can really, really expand your thought process for it. And I know it did it for me. And as far as big band goes, I used to write basically. It's kind of like when you. I imagine it's the same for you, but I know it was for me when I was listening to. When I was younger and I was listening to certain saxophone players, I just wanted to sound exactly like that person. I just wanted to basically be a clone of that person. Well, the same thing goes for writing, right? If you listen to a lot of a certain kind of an arranger, when I first really started getting into big band, I was just addicted to Bob Brookmeyer, and it's all I would listen to. And so my writing tried to just emulate that.
Yeah.
But kind of going back to what I was saying about amassing that synthesis of different influences, it's not any different for composition, I think. And so I'd like to think that some kind of an original voice, I mean, you know, that would be my ultimate goal, has emerged from all those influences.
Yeah.
Not only, I mean, on the horn, I would hope, but also as an arranger, composer.
Yeah.
Of big band and also of small group writing.
Yeah, totally. Man, when I was catching up with Dan Shemielinsky last month, he was like, "Oh man, who are you bringing in?" And I said your name, and he was like, "Oh man." It's like, that's my boy. He was like, that dude, he's like, has been a mentor to like everybody in town. And so
that's kind so sweet of him to say.
Yeah, well, he's the sweetest,
you
know, ever. And so I'm curious about, you know, because I could definitely learn from this. You know, in teaching, you told me that, you know, you balance both applied lessons in school, teaching lessons like there and doing classes, then also taking high school students as well, with the, of course, needed naps in between.
Right.
The
well,
naps,
that goes without
course,
saying.
Of course,
yeah.
Right. You know, it's the great. I think futons were invented for educators. you know, like I think that was like the whole thing. Where you're like, we need something fast and quick, just in case we don't want to drive home.
Absolutely.
You know, but you know, I find that I want to develop like a really close bond with my students, because it can, like, with singers especially, and I don't want to say this any less with any other instrument, but there's nothing to hide behind when you're singing. Like, it's you. So it's like, if somebody doesn't like you, it's hard not to take that personally as like a, you know, example of like, I don't like, you know, you or your inner voice. So I always like to make them feel very comfortable, build that relationship as any like teacher would want to do. But there also comes a point where you need to have, you know, firm expectations and like high standards. And sometimes those, you know, the kind of tough love, you know, saying, like, sometimes those aren't always able to marry perfectly. Sometimes you have to have those real conversations and such. Obviously, you've been a mentor that many people admire throughout, you know, the Chicago scene for the past many years. How do you strike that balance between, you know, that professional expectation and developing those relationships?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I guess, I don't know, maybe it's kind of a generic answer, but I think like you said, developing the relationship is absolutely key to understanding the best way to approach that student individually. You know, I mean, just, I don't think, for me, the approach of sort of a blanket, like, everyone must do this, all my students need to go through this process and then this and this and this, I just don't think that applies to, I don't think that's necessarily a realistic, for me, it hasn't been an effective way to teach. I mean, you just have to treat every student individually and understand this person, like someone like Shemielinsky, is going to become a professional musician. It's going to happen, you know. And so they need something different from you than someone who's more maybe talented, but is not going to really go the long way and take it into a career. And that goes for, and that can be very difficult when you have a big band that you're running, and which I did with Dan was in, and he was the bassist in this big, I used to teach at this organization, this kind of college prep organization in the Chicago suburbs, and that's where I met Dan. And I ran a few big bands, and there you had people like Dan in there, and then you had sort of more, you know, just kids who are sort of good at the instrument and practice, but they're not going, they have no aspirations to go on professionally. And I wouldn't have recommended that they go on professionally, but like someone like Dan, obviously it's been working out great for him. So that can be very, very challenging. And I think choosing good repertoire, you know, making yourself sort of open to listening to different types of repertoire and doing that homework and figuring out, okay, this would be a good one where I can strike that balance between working with this student in this way on the same chart as working with this student this way on the same. It's a tough tightrope to walk. And I remember, like, when I used to teach at Northwestern University, we had this summer program, and it was I think 5 weeks of just working with a quintet only, just 5 students, one of whom would eventually go on to be a professional musician, and the other on the other end of the spectrum, there was another student in there who could not really find his way through a blues.
Sure.
And so so that really taught me a lot about how do you do this? Like, how are you supposed to? You just have to. I think at a certain point, you just have to understand this person's going to be too challenged on some things, and this person's going to be bored on some things.
Yeah, right.
And there's no other way to get through it, you know.
Yeah.
But that was a really big learning experience because I had like 3 rehearsals with this quintet every day for 5 weeks, dealing with this huge disparity in talent and ability.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think to answer your question in a roundabout way, it just comes down to trying to understand each student individually as much as possible, not only their ability on the instrument, but just personally, you know. I just feel like I have try to, you know, understand, you know, high schoolers' sense of humor. It can, you know, finding the humor in that, and like just trying to relate to them without being like I'm cool too, you know, without coming across as an ancient, 1,000-year-old man.
Yeah.
But trying to relate to them and just sort of like meeting them where they're at, I think has a lot to do with it.
Totally, man. Yeah. I mean, that's something that there's one of my students who, you know, she's like 9 or 10 years old, and I noticed that for a while it was hard to get her like really excited and involved at the beginning of the lesson. Once she started singing, it was fine. It was coming out. You know, it's, you know, for that it's more like pop songs and stuff. You know, Disney songs and canto. You know, whatever the whole thing. But she would always be, as I was trying to get her interested, she would always be doing like dances, like just like as kind of a not a tick, but somewhat similar to that. And I think it was just like her like inherent interests on display, which are obviously influenced by TikTok. Like it was the TikTok dances, and so what I started doing was every lesson starts with we'll warm up, give me like a great warm up, like really go at it. It's only 30-minute lessons, and then I stand up. It's on Zoom, and then I stand up and I say, "Now you're going to teach me a TikTok dance." Oh, so that way it's like I'm teaching you, you're teaching me. Yeah. I'm teaching you my interest that you also have some interest in, and then you're teaching me the thing that you do the other, you know, 24 hours a day, 6 days and 23 hours later. You know, and you know, it also allows me to kind of get that familial kind of thing, because it's like I'm a terrible dancer. I cannot move at all. You know, my brother got that. Apple fell far. No, but like, and so I look ridiculous. It's so silly, but I know it means a lot to her, and she's always like, "Oh my God, I learned this one today."
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
And I think that's like evidence of kind of like a new generation that's coming around. Like even me, like I'm kind of like, what do they call them? Like a cusper, you know, like where I think technically I'm considered a millennial or Gen Z,
right.
depending on like whose metric or whatever.
Sure, yeah.
And that's like a weird place to be, because you're like kind of like without a land, or like a what's the saying, like a man without a country or something like that.
Yeah, right.
You know, but it allows me to kind of tap into that. You've been educating now for, you know, like over a decade. Yeah. Right. So have you shifted your teaching styles to accommodate the new generation? Maybe even here recently, Generation Z is now getting into the high school and collegiate levels. Have you consciously shifted to accommodate a new kind of vibe?
Wow. I don't know, honestly, because my first year teaching, I'll go from the university teaching perspective. Like my first year teaching, I was 20. I was your age. I was 26, and I was like, I was in a university classroom with a bunch of students just staring at you, like, okay, what do you got? You know, and a lot of them weren't too much younger than me, and so I was like, okay, it's just a lot of learning on the job. So a lot of that is kind of a blur, like the way that I first started, you know. But I do think that I'll put it this way. I think that the nature of teaching music, or maybe teaching in general, but just to stick to our discipline. The nature of teaching music to young people has had to undergo a shift, especially the way that I was taught, because I had directors in high school, college, grad school who were a lot more hardline and sort of like, if you don't like this, get out of here, kind of thing, you know, or a little bit more harsh in terms of sort of kidding around and joking and sort of good-natured ribbing, you know. And I think that if you go that direction too much, your student evaluations are going to cause you to lose your job.
Sure.
You know, I think it comes back to sort of treating, sort of like meeting, just getting a vibe from the student and meeting them at their level. You know, if they're very, very self-conscious, if they're very sensitive about playing or their musical ability or something like that, you sort of have to couch any kind of criticism in. You have to be very careful with that. You know, I'm not, and this is not me saying like, Gen Z is soft. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that I think the way that I was instructed 20 years ago, 25 years ago in high school and college, I just don't think that's really. I must have had to undergo a shift from then, because I know I was channeling a lot of those when I first started teaching. I was channeling a lot of those sort of harder edged influences, you know, and so I really kind of feel. I mean, you should next time you talk to Shimmy, you know, I'd be curious to know what he says, you know.
He's gonna be like, Chris was like, came into a rehearsal and was like, yeah, kids, I saw, how do you call it, one of those dank memes? It was really killing. Oh my God.
It was fire.
Yeah, right. It was fire. Dab. Yeah, right. You're like, yeah, you guys check out that guy Soldier Boy. They're like, homie.
Oh boy, here we go.
You're a little behind.
Yeah, right. Soldier Boy. Yeah, I definitely think that a lot of the things that some of my instructors, a lot of the tactics they had, and this is I'm not throwing shade anywhere, but I'm just saying a lot of the tactics they had and that I sort of co-opted when I first started teaching have had to undergo a change. Just because generationally things are different now.
Of course.
But I think a lot of people that would complain about that, I think that there's almost kind of a straw man there, because if you just, it comes back to just getting the vibe of each student, understanding how they feel, and sort of testing the limits of where you can go, and still trying to get results out of them.
Yeah.
It just takes, like teaching is hard. It takes effort, and we have to put in the effort that we're asking them to do on their instrument. We have to put it in on our end too.
Totally.
You know,
man, that's great advice. Let me ask you this, starting off the speed round that we do kind of near the end is, can you think of the best piece of advice that you've been given?
Yeah. If I had to pick one, the first one that comes to mind would be, and one that I've passed on to my students too. My high school band director told us, don't practice it until it's right. Practice it until it can't be wrong. You know, and it's kind of clear. It becomes you kind of figure that out on your own as you get older. But for me to hear that in high school was like, oh, okay, so that's how much I need to be practicing.
Sure,
it's big.
Totally. Here's a question that I'm going to ask everybody. Best place to get a slice?
Oh boy,
in Chicago. I'm curious to see if there will be overlap.
Well, I'm wading into dangerous piranha-infested waters here, because there's a lot of. I mean, pizza is, people hold it dear. I would say I like. A lot of people badmouth deep dish in Chicago. I love deep dish.
Yeah.
I don't have it all the time.
Yeah.
For obvious reasons, but I would say Lou Malnati's.
Okay.
Deep dish Lou Malnati's. Yeah.
Boom. There it is. Now, as far as, we were talking about this earlier, just like giving context to audiences.
Yeah.
For me, like, I can hear a song and be immediately transported back to where I was or what stage of life I was in, or just like that kind of nostalgic thing. Like every time I hear Somewhere in My Memory from Home Alone, which is that main theme.
Yeah, sure.
It's just like my body is like noodles, and I'm just like, wow, I could die living in the fullness of John Williams right now. You know, are there any specific tunes you can think of, or any kind of associations that take you back to a very nostalgic feeling at any point of your life?
Yeah, there's one song that I cannot listen to because it makes me too emotional.
Really?
I mean, it's not even a jazz song, but it's "Sailing" by Christopher Cross. It's just like it's the epitome of yacht rock, dad rock, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, that would be it, because it just reminds me of like really one of my first memories. It's one of the first songs I ever remember hearing.
Yeah.
And it was on the radio when I was a kid, and my parents really liked it. They had like an LP with it. And it just reminds me of like my most youngest, most vulnerable memory of being a little kid, like probably 2 or 3. You know? And yeah, so that song that's a tearjerker for me.
Yeah,
I gotta be careful.
There's an unbelievable pianist in town whose name is Sean Michael Giddings, and he goes on tour with Christopher Cross all the time, because Christopher Cross lives either in Austin or San Antonio, this area. So
no kidding, I didn't
you
know
guys
that.
should talk. I'm sure he's going to be at one of the jam sessions.
Oh man, I will.
Yeah.
I think I've seen his name too on social media or something like that.
Dude,
so.
He just released this record that like he's got this song called Non-Essential, and it just feels like it's this like kind of like bossa nova flute and winds and it's just feels like it was plucked right out of the 80s.
Oh,
you
cool.
know, it's
yeah,
very much kind of that, you know, I think somebody was telling me the other day that his like ultimate influence is Randy Newman.
Oh,
you know?
Cool. Yeah.
And like,
sure.
I think he just perfectly channels in this new record. It's really, really quite amazing. I'll text him and see if we can link
Oh
up.
man, I'd love to talk to him. Yeah. I'll check it out.
Man. Okay. So the final question is one that I love, and it doesn't have to be negative per se. It can just be crazy. But we all have gigs from hell where things go like totally sideways. We've had the full gamut of like, you know, somebody came in, they're having a beer at the bar, and somebody says, so-and-so, you've played me for the last time. They turn around and the person's got a gun.
Ooh,
and they pull them over the thing. We've had like, you know, being held against their will at a gig throughout the morning, like just crazy travel days. Can you think of any particular, and you don't have to name names, of course.
Sure.
Any particularly crazy gig stories?
Well, I'm actually kind of lucky, because I most of the gigs I've ever played have been pretty normal.
Sure. But
one that comes to the first thing that comes to mind would be, I mean, we all know how notorious Chicago winters are, right? It's polar vortex all the time, you know.
Yeah.
And I remember being on this one big band gig, and for some reason, like the door to the outside was right next to the stage, and it was stuck open for some reason. It was like January, and it must have been below 0 outside, and I don't know why, but we still had to continue to play, and everyone on stage is wearing their winter gear with like parkas and hats and stuff, and you know the snow is like sort of blowing in the door. What? Like, why are we doing this? Can we just not play? You know?
Yeah, sure.
But for some reason we had to soldier on, and so we played this gig, and yeah, it was insane. Just looking to my left and my right and seeing 2 guys wearing these big parkas and playing saxophone. So stupid. And it's something that could, you know, that's a very Chicago winter kind of a story.
Sure,
but I'm sure something worse will occur to me later, but that one sticks in my memory.
Sure. Well, you know, we started this talking about the Sloppy Boys.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then you said you had to soldier on.
Yeah.
So I think at this point, we can probably safely call the band that day the Soldier Boys.
Okay.
In a beautiful, roundabout way, you are now the new knighted, we'll get a sword, knighted Chris Madsen.
Newly knighted Sir Chris Madsen.
Yeah. Sir,
thank you.
forgive
Let's be
me.
careful now.
I just the disrespect, the utter disrespect.
Amazing.
In your house of all places for me to come in. Man, Chris, what a pleasure it is, man, to have you guys in town. I just feel like that just right off the bat, sitting down at dinner last night, I was like, oh, the vibe is going to be good.
Oh,
Everybody's a great hang.
Yeah.
Truly, it's a privilege and a pleasure to know you and to sit down and like chat in an extended form, man.
Thank you so much for having us,
Dude,
man.
Of course.